I knew Don Latham was popular, but I didn't realise quite how popular he was. Look at all these friends. A huge thank you to Don, who invited me to be here this morning. As Grant kindly said, my name's Matt Bird. I live in a little place called Wimbledon, known for the Wombles and the tennis and a few other things. And we travelled up to Bristol last night. I probably shouldn't say Bristol, should I? Is there any rivalry, Bath, Bristol? Not, where's that? and stayed with some friends of ours who moved there from Wimbledon last year. Andrew is here. So I've left my family over there for our kids to play together this morning while I join you. And it's just great to be here. You know, I travel a lot as a speaker. And speakers have this little routine, you see. When they stand up, they suddenly begin to announce they've got a book to sell. And there's a little table to one side here. And if you're willing to part with £20, then you can go and buy the book. And it will inspire you and change your life. So £20 is nothing in comparison. Well, that's not my style, actually, because I actually want to give you a free book this morning. Anybody interested? Yeah, a free breakfast and a free book. That's a pretty good start to Saturday, isn't it? So, to enable me to give it to you for free, it's a digital book. So if you've got a pen or you have a smartphone or a device like me, I'm just going to give you a website and you can go there. Go there now and put your name and email in. It will send you the book by return. If it's something you want to do later, then jot down the web address and you can do it in the comfort of your own home. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit of my story. So are you ready? So firstly, the free book. relationology.co.uk. And if you don't have to spell it, come and see me afterwards and I'll give you a business card. So I want to tell you a little bit of my story, if I may. Don made very clear to me this was not a preachy slot, but simply one guy to a group of guys telling something of their story. And so that's what I thought I'd do this morning. I don't come to you with grand stories of phenomenal world change, but I come to you as another man. And I grew up in a home that I always remember wasn't particularly sociable. Maybe not many of you relate to that, but my home wasn't particularly sociable. I can remember, for example, only on one occasion did I ever have a friend home from school to my home. It happened once. I can remember my mum and dad had some friends, but having friends over was something that happened very rarely. Something that does impress deeply in my memory, and we all have these memories from our childhood, don't we, is my father each day getting in from work, kicking off his shoes, throwing himself like a diver onto the sofa and watching TV until supper was called. Then he'd leave the sofa and move to the kitchen table, eat supper and return back to the sofa till it was bedtime. On a couple of occasions, I remember the doorbell ringing in the midst of this daily routine. And I can remember clearly my father reaching for the remote control for the television, finding a little button on the remote control called mute, pressing it, ushering my sister, my mother and I to hide behind the sofa and pretend nobody was at home. It was a few years later when I realised that wasn't the purpose of the doorbell. So actually, having grown up in a home that now, reflecting back, I felt like was impoverished of relationships, is one of the reasons why I believe relationships are so important in life. When I was at school, I didn't do well, remedial maths, remedial English, and I remember not having great career aspirations. I was a timid boy. I didn't grow up being particularly confident and comfortable around people. I remember an early experience where I used to run a little car washing business. I was an entrepreneur even back then. And on a weekend, I'd get my bucket and my sponge and my bike, and I'd tour around the neighbourhood washing people's cars. And it first struck me that relationships were really important when one day I was kind of 15, I was kind of a year from due to leave school, and this guy whose car I washed every week, one of my regular customers, said to me, "Matt, what are you going to do when you leave school?" I said, "I've no idea, John." And he said, "Why don't you think about working for the Ministry of Defence?" And I said, "Why would I do that?" He said, "Well, they've got a really good apprenticeship. Are you interested?" I said, "Yes." And next time I went to wash the car, he gave me the application form. Next time I went to wash the car, afterwards I gave him my completed application form, which he then helped me rewrite, humiliatingly. Then I got called for interview, and he prepared me for interview. But to cut a long story short, my first ever job, incidentally it's my only ever job because I've worked for myself ever since, my first ever job was the result of a relationship. And it's my observation that through life, all the good things that come to us come as a result of a friendship, don't they? I even met my wife through a friend. Let's move on. But I was quite timid, lacking in confidence. But something happened to me when I was 19 because, again, a friend took me to an event. I don't know how many of you here this morning have been brought here by a friend to this event. I'm not going to ask you to indicate, but I'm hoping some of you have been brought here as guests. Well, a friend took me to an event as a guest, and I met some people who were obsessed about their religion, and they were obsessed about a person called Jesus Christ. And I must say, it made me feel pretty uncomfortable. Whenever they were talking about their faith, I kind of wanted to join another conversation. But these people left an impression, a deep impression with me. And shortly after going to that event, I thought, I'm going to give this a go. And I started to look to Jesus as a person, to follow, to give me guidance. And I literally felt in those moments, he took hold of my life and took it in a new direction. And for me, one of the most significant things that happened at that time, now looking back, and I think actually there was a journey there of becoming what people call a Christian. Looking back now to that time, the biggest thing that changed in me was my confidence. Because I changed from this little boy that was taught to hide behind the sofa when somebody rang at the door, who was timid at school, picked on at school. I suddenly discovered that actually it didn't really matter what anybody else thought. Actually, what mattered the most was what God thought. And I grew in a deep awareness that God loved me. But more than that, because it's easy to say you love someone, isn't it? But God actually liked me. Because love can gloss over things, can't it? But actually to like somebody, not regardless of who they are, but because of who they are, that for me was a liberating experience. I found a self-confidence and a God confidence that subsequently has allowed me to do things I could have never imagined doing in all my life. And so for me, that friend who took me to that event was the beginning of a whole new life that still lives in me. And it's that story really that I wanted to tell this morning. A few years ago, I remember sitting in a coffee shop with a friend of mine called Mike. It's all friendships, isn't it? And he said he runs this little festival. In fact, it's run not far from here in Bath and Wells Showground. Something called some little youth festival called Soul Survivor. And he said to me, Matt, he said, in a couple of years' time, I'm not going to run the festival. And I said to him, Mike, what's the matter? What's gone wrong? And he said, well, he said, young people, like most people, take very little notice of what we say and only notice of what we do. And he said, every year at the festival, we talk about the importance of going out into society and making a difference, about getting involved in communities, in work of mission and evangelism and outreach. They said, but everybody goes home from the festival wanting to be the next Matt Redman, worship leader, or the next Mike Pilavacci or Pete Hughes speaker. And he said, we need to model something different. And he said, so in 2 years' time, I'm thinking of not doing the festival. I'm thinking of bringing those 20,000 young people who come together in that cowshed and bring them to London and getting them to do community mission and to volunteer in community projects to help people in the community. I remember saying to Mike, we should work with the government on this and we should work with the police on this. And he said, how would we do that, Matt? And this was the beginning of me getting very deeply involved in that project, Soul in the City 2004. And we ended up mobilising over 22,000 young people in the summer after that in Soul in the City, working with 1,000 churches, serving communities all across Greater London. And it was in that 2-year period that I discovered that I had a little knack for relationships. Somehow I found myself in 10 Downing Street, securing the support of the Prime Minister. I found myself in the City Hall, securing the support of the Mayor of London. I found myself in front of the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, gaining his support. He ended up delaying going on his family holiday so he could visit projects. He became a great friend of the whole scheme. We launched the event at Downing Street. He helped us secure Trafalgar Square for the finale. But all these things, we raised $500,000 actually at one event we did towards the project. And I discovered during this time that actually relationships were the fastest and easiest way to get anything done in life. And a few years after that, a friend of mine said, Matt, will you come and speak at my business conference? Will you come and speak about networking? Now, I don't know how you react when you hear that word, but let me tell you how I react. When I hear that word, I squirm inside. I think about manipulation, self-serving, contrived relationships that are kind of, your worst experiences. You're sat there at breakfast or you're at some event and somebody's talking to you, and all the time you think, they're sizing me up to see if I could be useful to them. And if you can be useful to them, then they'll stick around with you. If they think this person can't be useful to me, they'll be off like a shot. And so when he said to me, will I come and speak about networking, my response was, no way. I said, I can't stand networking. I said, I am passionate about building long-term, mutually beneficial relationships. And he said to me, Matt, will you come and speak about that? Well, this was the beginning for me of an awareness. Soul in the City was part of that story. Hiding behind the sofa was that part of that story. Becoming a Christian was part of that story. But in this moment, speaking at this conference about relationships, I realized that people had a real appetite to understand how relationships worked. And I remember hosting a relationship masterclass after the conference. I remember this couple turning up and sitting at the table, and as we went round introducing ourselves, them saying we thought we were coming to a marriage enrichment masterclass, and I thought I must come up with a new name. And it's in that moment that I thought, actually, I'm about the art and the science of relationships, and that's when the word relationology came to mind. And I quickly ran to the trademarks office in here and various other countries to trademark it. But that's the business I've now found myself in. Actually, what I've learned through life, I now outwork in a commercial context. Because relationships has everything to do with new business development. Relationships have everything to do with client relationship management. Relationships has everything to do with employee engagement and releasing discretionary effort within people's work. Last year I was invited to pitch for a piece of work. It's strange how it came about, actually, because every week I write a relationology tip. Every Monday morning I send to thousands of people around the world a thought. 300 words, you can read it in a matter of moments, And it goes out around the world to people that are interested. And when you sign up for my book, as I mentioned at the beginning, you're signing up to my tips, but at the moment I'm giving this free book away. But you'll also get my weekly thought. And I just got this phone call out of the blue last summer from this guy saying, "Oh, I read your relationology tips." And he said, "I find them amazing." He said, "I've got a piece of work for you. By the way, I'm the Director of Talent Development at blah, 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 High Street Bank." And I tell you what, I went through the most rigorous pitching and procurement process I've ever been through. And it was highly complex, lots of documentation. I hate doing business that way, but sometimes you have to. And I was delighted at the end of the process that I secured and won the contract. But you know what? The week before I went into that bank to start working with their senior managers, the Director of Talent Development phoned me. And he said to me, "Matt, actually putting all that stuff, that procurement process to one side," he said, "all we want you to do is to come into the bank and help us build trust and community." I want to say this morning that there is an erosion of trust in our society. Let's start with the banks as we're there. We don't just stay there very long, do we? We want to have a cheery breakfast. But the public's confidence in the banking system, for lots of reasons which we won't go into, has been knocked. Trust in banking has been eroded. And I do a lot of work with banks. I'm not knocking banks. Trust in politics and politicians has been knocked. Trust has been damaged. Trust in the media, trust in policing, even trust in the church. A friend of mine was pioneering a project working with children. I won't say which area of the country, but he went to see the Catholic bishop. And the Catholic bishop said, "I'm sorry, we can't touch any projects with children at the moment." So many institutions and so many leaders in public life have damaged the trust of our society in them and their institutions. And I believe, actually, that we need to be in the business of restoring trust in one another, building trust in our communities, rebuilding credibility. And that's the business that I now find myself in, often working in the UK, but also in West Africa, with clients, helping them rebuild trust with their customers and their clients, and also rebuilding trust with their employees. Because when trust breaks down, people don't perform well. People don't work at their best. Last week I was in with one of the big four professional services firms, accountancy firms, and they were talking to me about their new process for selecting future partners within the firm. Their partner candidate criteria. And they said, we've identified 12 key attributes for future partners within the business. I was stunned that only one of those criteria was about their professional capability and competence. And it was actually number 12 in the list. It was incredibly important within their business that they had the very best people that were technically competent. But it was at the bottom of the list of 12 key attributes. The other 11 attributes above it were all about their partner's ability to interact and build relationships with people, to build internal networks, to build external networks, to have resilience in relationships, to be able to have a bad meeting with a client, but to be able to restore trust and rebuild that relationship. The Dale Carnegie Institute did some research once that said that 15% of financial success was due to technical knowledge. But 85% of financial success was due to skill in human engineering. I want to say that whatever sector, whatever part of society that you occupy, that relationships matter, and relationships matter more than anything else in all the world. And speaking to probably the majority of people here, as Christians like me, we have a special invitation to build relationships, don't we? Because actually all that I do in the corporate environment, and I don't tell them this, but it's actually based upon my Christian faith. Because I believe in a God who is Trinitarian. I believe in a Father, I believe in Jesus Christ, I believe in His Spirit, and I believe He is one God. And I believe that that God exists in this dynamic community where the Father loves the Son and the Son loves the Father. And they send the Spirit into the world to continue to do their work, the work which Christ began. That's the God I believe in. And so I believe that God exists in this dynamic community. And some people look at me and think, well, that's not logical, is it? You're talking about one God but three people? Well, I'm not a mathematician. And I was in remedial maths at school. But I can do this basic sum. That, yes, 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3. But I can do another sum that says 1 multiplied by 1 is 1. And so for me, understanding who God is completely rational and completely logical. And I believe that everyone is created in the image of that God. And therefore we are created in the likeness of a God who is community. So we are created in His image for relationships and community. We are designed, we are created for mutual respect, for love, for care, for interaction with one another. And actually to take any step away from that is a denial of what it means for us to be human. Because we were born for relationships. And that's what makes the world work. Whether you're working in the church, or whether you're working in business, or politics, or media, or the charity sector, or in local government. Actually, the whole of life is actually about making relationships work. It's about sticking at relationships when they're difficult. It's about finding a way through when you're in conflict. And it's about holding it together, whatever the circumstances. So, in closing, if you're sat here and you're a business person, I was in Ghana a couple of weeks ago working with one of their national banks. And I kind of want to say the same message to you this morning as I said to them. If you're in banking, I don't know if there is anybody here in banking, but I want to say to you, if you're in banking, the true currency of banking is relationships, not money. Because actually, if you break trust, you break your business. If you're sat here this morning and you're involved in church life, I want to say to you, the true currency of church life is relationships. Whatever business or sphere of influence you're in politics, the true currency of politics is actually relationships. And because I believe that out of choice, people choose to do business with and people choose to work with people they know and trust rather than people they don't. And if you're in business, relationships offer you the ultimate competitive advantage. I do a lot of work with the big four accountancy firms. And as an outsider who wants an accountant for their business, they all look pretty much the same. You know, auditing services, tax services, consulting services. Why go for one rather than the other? Maybe a little bit of price difference. The truth is that you will choose a provider of services for your business from somebody you know and trust rather than somebody you don't. Ultimately, you'll probably go with the provider where you know and trust one of the partners or one of the senior members of staff. Because I want to say to you, the value of knowing somebody and of trusting somebody is commercially valuable. It offers the ultimate differentiator in a crowded marketplace. It offers the ultimate competitive advantage. And so I want to encourage you this morning, as men, I want to encourage you to be intentional about relationships. I want to encourage you to be deliberate about relationships. Relationships are the true currency of business and life. Thank you.